Well, good morning, guys, and welcome to the first mentoring session with Creel Price. Great to have you on the call today. Today, just to give you a bit of a rundown, like I mentioned in my email, I will be introducing Creel shortly, but he'll be covering the first four modules of the Train Your Entrepreneur Eye program. So, whilst he's going through those modules, please feel free to type in any questions you have so we can get them answered. And we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. And then once we finish the modules, we'll then go on to some Q&As. That could be questions you might have around the program or outside, just in relation to your business. So without further ado, I will welcome Creel into the webinar and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so guys, welcome to the webinar. Obviously, because this is a coaching webinar, there's only a few people online today, which is going to be great actually, because we really wanted to have an experiment with how do we actually do some webinars that are less just about me talking, but a little bit more interactive, but not just interactive about asking questions of what I'm talking about, but how can we actually use this as a coaching tool to maybe help your businesses out. So if you can help out and ask some questions along the way, that's really what this is mostly about. If you don't answer questions, I'll just fill the void with me doing more and more talking, which is I'm going to try and avoid if we can. As far as an agenda for today goes, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on the overview of what decisionship is about. Then I'll recap the first four modules. Obviously, there's going to be three of these mentoring sessions. The first one we're going to cover modules 1 to 4. The second one will cover modules 5 to 10, and then the last mentoring session will be a bit of a recap of the whole program and the modules 11, 12. And then obviously at the end we'll get some chance to do Q&A, which is a bit free flow, but I will get you to ask some questions as I do each module as well, to see if there's any points you didn't understand or you need clarified, or working out how you can implement it or apply it to your business. So if you can send those through, that would be great. On your GoToWebinar tool, there's an opportunity there to put your hand up. So just to see whether that's working or not, if you want to put your hands up, those people that are listening on. Some of you I know are already using dialing in using your phone, so the interactivity for you guys may be a little bit more difficult today. Okay, so a few of you guys have put your hand up. That's great. Right, so moving on, what is decisionship? You'll recall and hopefully have received a copy of my book, The One Thing to Win at the Game of Business. I guess I had been asked, numerous occasions by lots of different entrepreneurs to find out what was the one thing that made Blueprint one of the most successful and fast-growing businesses in Australia, and what was the one thing that enabled us to do that without any much startup capital. We had $5,000 each, Trevor, my business partner, and I, and up until the point when we sold it for $109 million, we didn't get any external capital. So it was quite an unusual story. So a lot of people really wanted to know what was the one secret that enabled us to do that. And initially I dismissed this idea of that there was really one thing more than anything else, because in a 10-year business journey, there's so many aspects, I guess, to building a business rather than just one. But after the 20th or so time I heard this, I started to think, what, there really is one thing more than anything else that contributed to our success. And then when I started to work with other entrepreneurs and look at the success stories of some of the best entrepreneurs around the world, I actually realized there is one skill more than any other that entrepreneurs need to really hone. And that skill is something that I call decisionship. And decisionship, I guess, is defined as as making better, faster decisions without the angst. So there's three components, I guess, that make up decisionship, which we'll spend a little bit of time on in this module 1. But obviously, you don't want to make just fast decisions, then they're being pretty hopeless decisions. So you need to have a good, somewhere in between too fast and too slow. You certainly want to make better decisions more often, because that's going to improve your chances of being successful at business. But this last point about the angst is pretty important, because one of my passions is how do we get not only entrepreneurs being better at business, but how do we get entrepreneurs enjoying the game of business? And that's where this angst thing comes in, which I'll talk about in a minute. So there's really 3 levels of understanding in the Train Your Entrepreneurial Life program. That's pretty deliberately, and it can, I guess, come across a little bit convoluted for that reason. It's not just one of those courses where you start at the start and everyone finishes at the end. Entrepreneurs are busy people. Some people will get through a little bit, some people will get through a medium bit, and some people really want to master this skill, because if they are like me and believe that decisionship is the one thing that's going to help them succeed at business, well, they will hone that level 3 understanding. So just quickly, the level 1 understanding is really just the acknowledgement that you agree that entrepreneurship is decisionship. And that alone, just that one bit of belief of saying that, wow, my job as an entrepreneur is to make faster, better informed decisions without the angst, will make you better at entrepreneurship, and also it will start making you understand and enjoy the journey as well. Okay, so just with that level, even if you don't feel like you're going to get through all of the modules, it's a pretty positive thing, just that acknowledgement. Next up is a level 2 understanding. That's where we look at the 3 steps: the define, assess, and decide. Because a lot of entrepreneurs are already using those 3 steps when they make decisions without knowing about it. But the simple recognition of realizing that you do go through those 3 steps and how can you be better at each of those steps will improve your decision making and therefore your business success. And then lastly, the level 3 understanding is where we introduce the concepts of insight, foresight, and hindsight. Because a real insight about these things will really start to hone your ability to be a master at decisionship. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through module 3 today. Let's start off with module 1 and what we covered in decisionship. As I mentioned before, there's 3 main things here that get covered: speed, information, and angst. And each of these 3 things build up what we call your unique decisionship profile. Everyone makes decisions differently, and it's that unique profile that we're not necessarily completely trying to change. We're just trying to really give you a greater awareness of how you make decisions, so therefore you can work out how you can actually improve that decision-making process. So if we kick things off, most of you would have done the decision-making profile. Okay, so the decision-making profile was to try to identify, first of all, how is your speed in relation to making decisions? Is it very slow or very fast or somewhere in between? Well, someone who's very slow, we call a procrastinator. Someone who's a baldergate is someone that makes decisions very fast. Then we move to the amount of information that you have. Okay, so someone who's always fairly ill-informed is what we call a head in the sand. Someone's very informed is a data junkie. And you can also be somewhere a little bit in between those 2 personality traits of making decisions. And lastly is the angst. Someone is a happy-go-lucky if they don't really get anxious very much at all about their decision making, whereas the worrywart gets anxious all the time. Even the simplest decisions, they feel like they're the rabbit caught in the headlights, and that's not a good way to be, because if you're a worrywart, you're clearly not going to be enjoying the game of business. But at the same time, a certain amount of angst, particularly around those big decisions, is pretty important if you think about it. Otherwise, if we're too cavalier, we're not going to be taking business maybe serious as we probably should. Okay, so if that's our decision-making profile, let's now go into the how you might be able to improve that. So, for instance, if the speed you make decisions is too fast or too slow, it's going to have an impact on your business. So maybe while we're going through this, why don't you think about the speed you make decisions, regardless of what score you got in the decision-making profile. Just think about it. Are you someone that tends towards faster or slower decisions? Write down an issue this might have caused your business in the past. Okay, so once you've got that written down, you need to think, okay, so if you're one of those people that is a procrastinator, always delaying decisions or decision making to another time, you're going to be someone that's pretty frustrating to work for, okay? Because people like to get some forward momentum, whether it's clients or suppliers or even your employees. How do we actually start to improve that speed? Well, my tip, if you are a procrastinator, is you need to start making some fast, minor decisions outside of the business. So, for instance, if you pick up the menu at a restaurant, you really should be having a 30-second scan, and the first thing that jumps out at you, you should make a decision on that. Or even sometimes only ever limit yourself to ordering from the specials menu rather than have to look through the menu. Okay, this will start to get procrastinators to think, wow, sometimes I need a little bit less information and I can just make a decision. Or if you're going to the bookstore to buy a book, the first book that jumps out at you is probably the right one for you, rather than you have to spend an hour reading the back covers of all of those books. Next up, on the opposite side of the spectrum, is what we call a bulleted gate. Okay, so a bulleted gate is someone that makes decisions a little bit too fast. And to be honest, I was probably a bulleted gate myself. I didn't realise that making a decision today and then changing your mind tomorrow was such a big deal. I've done it all my life, but until you start to have some employees, you don't realise that this really disrupts them. Okay, people like a little bit of constancy, or consistency rather. They like a little bit of surety. So being a bulleted gate can be pretty distracting in your business if you're always changing your mind. And I'll talk a little bit later about the entrepreneur's curse in module 4, and particularly people that are bulleted gate often have the entrepreneur's curse. So what would you do about it if you were a bulleted gate tendency? Okay. Well, it's my belief that you need to start sleeping on decisions before you share them. I'll make a decision today, I'll tell everyone about it, and then tomorrow I'll change my mind. Well, I've learnt that, in my mind I might have made this decision, but let me sleep on it overnight before I actually share it with anyone. Otherwise, they keep thinking that I've got a couple of different personalities if I change my mind all the time. Okay, so that simple tip will hopefully counter some of the issues of being a bulleted gate. The whole decisionship methodology, in fact, will help in a big way, because by being a little bit more overt about how people make decisions and having a process to follow, you'll find you'll be a little bit less of a bulleted gate. Also, you'll be a little bit less of a procrastinator, because you'll start to have belief in the system and you'll make some decisions. Okay, so that's on the speed side of things. If we now move over to the information that you have when you make your decisions, so maybe write down, how informed are you when you make your decisions? Are you someone that likes huge amounts of information, or are you someone that really doesn't need that information that much? You just go mostly off your gut feel. And one of the things to stipulate in advance is, just because there's a very comprehensive process that I've mapped out that's quite intellectualized, it doesn't mean that I don't believe in gut feel decision making. Okay, so gut feel decision making is really important. But what you'll find is the better you are at decision making or decisionship, the more that your gut is going to be trained, and the more you can actually start to trust it as well. Okay, so the two things work together. So let's have a think. If you were a data junkie, okay, someone that likes huge amounts of reams and reams of information, and sometimes it takes months and months to generate it, and the issue with that, of course, is that the opportunity might be missed, or that you get so much data, it all conflicts, so therefore you never make a decision anyway. So what I'd like these people to do is start using your gut feel a lot more, rather than relying always on external data. Oftentimes you'll know what the right decision is. Okay. Next up is on the opposite side of the spectrum, is people that don't need any information at all. And that's equally as dangerous being in business, because just with asking a few more questions, or that little bit of extra research, could save you a huge amount of time, cost, and angst. So what you really should be doing is you're starting to ask advice from peers. So if you're thinking about hiring an office, or ask someone that's already rented an office before and ask them what, before you rush in and put a deposit down, ask you what you should, they've learned from their decision making that might be able to help you out. Or conduct some research. The interweb is an amazing tool. Type in a pretty simple statement and you can actually come up with some amazing information. Someone would have already written 12 tips to negotiating an office lease, as an example. So you can be able to find it. But also, I was a big user of advisors in my business. We always had a group of advisors of grey hair that had been there, done that, and it was our opportunity to make sure that they didn't allow us to be head in the sands. Okay, that they had made a lot of decisions we were making, so they could shed some light on some of those decisions. Okay, and then lastly, we've got the this area of how do you make faster, better informed decisions, but without the angst. Okay, so start to think about when you're making decisions, pretty big decisions, particularly. Do you get really anxious and you can't sleep at night? You wake up in the three o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat, or are you someone that goes, oh yeah, whatever, it's only business, it's only a decision, it's only my employees' lives, it's only my clients that we need to look after. Okay, you're a little bit more cavalier. So based on that, write down an issue this might have caused you in business in the past. Okay, because one of the things that I have learned with people that are really nervous running their own business, if there's someone that's actually on the opposite side of the spectrum to the happy-go-lucky, if they're a worrywart, these people have a massive impact on their employees. If they're really worried that the business is going to go bust next month, their employees will be really worried, and that will start to flow through. And particularly if your salespeople start to have a lack of belief in your products, clearly they're not going to sell it. No matter what they say to the customer, the actual energy they give off makes a big difference. But let's cover happy-go-lucky first. So happy-go-lucky people are ones that don't really have too much anxiousness about making decisions. But what's the problem with that? Okay, I guess the problem about being too cavalier is they might not see the impacts of a decision they make today on their other stakeholders. So, for instance, if they go, okay, I'm just going to change put our prices up today, they might go, okay, well, that's going to be a good business decision, but they don't actually, so happy-go-lucky about it, they don't actually realise that that's going to make a big difference to your employees, it's going to make a big difference to your clients, it could make a difference to your IT team because they're going to have to go through and change all the prices on your system, and your branding people will have to change the brochures. So sometimes being happy-go-lucky can have a real impact. So what can you do? For me, it's about considering the impact of your decisions on the other stakeholders. Always take that extra one day to actually say, okay, well, what would be the impact, or how could we make this decision more of a win-win for the rest of our stakeholders, which we're going to get through in Module 11 when we talk about the perpetual growth principles. Okay, the worrywart side of things is someone that's not enjoying the game of business at all, and I'd like to really change it if you are someone who is a worrywart. And how you do that is keep reminding yourself that entrepreneurship is decisionship to start off with. You've got to realise that being in business is making decisions, and there is no such thing as perfect decisions. So if you're in business and you think all of your decisions are going to work, I've got some news for you. You're in for a pretty rude shock. So realise that entrepreneurship is decisionship. In the next module, I'll talk a little bit about the speed of making decisions and why that's important in relation to reducing your angst. But it's going to be all around how do you play the percentages of minor, major, and mega decisions. Okay, so for instance, a minor decision is one where it might be the colour of your brochure, or it might be whether you give your employee an incentive this month or not. Okay, if those minor decisions are right maybe 25% of the time, you're doing pretty well. Major decisions, things like maybe employing a new receptionist or employing a general manager, if you get those decisions right 50% of the time, you're probably doing well. And then those mega decisions, whether you get an investor or a business partner or you move offices, if you get them right 75% of the time, you're probably doing pretty well. So just remember that your job as an entrepreneur is first of all that it's decisionship, and then you need to play those odds. And then hopefully that'll automatically mean you have a little bit of less angst in your business. Before we go on, is there any questions around how you might be able to, or for those particularly that one of these personalities is really frustrating or it's really hindering your business. What's a question that you might have specifically that I could help out in relation to how this might be able to? So there's a few hands up there. Al, you might be able to help us out and put the. All right, so you can put. He's just saying that you can actually put your hand up and we can unmute you and you can ask us direct if you don't want to type the question in. Sounds like 9 o'clock in the morning. You guys are a quiet bunch, so so we might plow on a little bit further. I think that's one of the issues with GoToWebinar sometimes is if you're doing it on your phone, it doesn't make it quite as interactive. But even so, let's move on to module 2. Which module 2 is really the goal of module 2 is how do we actually define what we call the affirmative question. Because sometimes as entrepreneurs, I think we plow into the solution a little bit too fast. We're too quick to say, okay, the answer is this. Whereas what I've actually learned in business, if you take a little bit of a step back and you define the question really well, you're more likely to actually come up with the best decision in the long run. Okay. Okay, so there's a little statement that you might have heard before, but the question is more important than the answer, and that's very true here in the define stage. Okay, so what's the process for defining the affirmative question? Well, there's 5 steps essentially. The first step is to identify the issue or opportunity. So there's 2 ways, I guess, that that you need to make decisions. One is reactive decisions. Someone rings you up and says, "Oh, I've got a stand at a trade expo. Would you like to take it up? I'm going to give it to you for half price, but you need to decide by tomorrow." Okay, so that's an opportunity, and that's a reactive opportunity. Or say, for instance, a proactive issue. A reactive issue maybe is someone comes up and says, okay, I'm going to leave the company, you need to replace them, right? That's a reactive issue. But a proactive issue might be something like you've sat down and you looked at the strategy and your margins aren't high enough, so you're not making enough money. So that's an example of, okay, stick the issue out there. Once you've put the issue or the opportunity out there, regardless of whether it's proactive or reactive, is the first thing to do is actually start to get clear on the facts and feelings and the difference between facts and feelings. Sometimes as entrepreneurs, we're very quick to say that something that we think is a feeling, for instance, a feeling is, oh, my prices are too high. That's not a fact. That's a feeling. I think they're too high. A fact would be calling up 200 of your customers to find out whether they think your prices are too high or not, or comparing your price to 10 of your competitors' prices. Okay, that's a fact. It's not a feeling. So if you get really clear on the facts and feelings, this will start to define the decision as well. We mentioned just a minute ago around how important it is to specify the size. I see so many entrepreneurs getting really bogged down. I mentioned before about the colour of their brochure. Those really minor decisions, they might spend 4 days doing that, whereas the business is bleeding money, and the strategy decisions would have been a better use of their time rather than just these really minor logo or branding type decisions people get bogged down in. Okay, the other part of specifying is how do you specify the type? What I've learned in making lots of decisions in my business career is you start to build up quite a bit of hindsight. Okay, so for instance, I split the decisions into 5 different types. One would be a customer type of decision. For instance, how a customer decision would be, when do you sack a customer that's being too high maintenance? I split them down into employee decisions. That's things like, how do I hire, motivate and fire employees? There's strategy decisions. There's resource decisions. Should I buy this or not buy this? And then there's financial decisions. Should I get an investor? How will I fix my cash flow? Those sort of things. So by putting things into type, your brain can quickly start to think. So for instance, if this is an employee hiring decision, my mind always goes to, okay, how do I not hire this person? How do I put them on a casual basis? Or how do I rearrange some of the employees I've already got in order to fill that gap, rather than just plow straight into hire a permanent employee that I'm going to be stuck with? Okay, so by splitting them into the type means your mind can actually really focus down and use your hindsight from the past. The 4th step is is really making sure that now's the right time to make a decision, or should we defer it until later? And making a decision to defer is a decision. So saying, okay, well, I'm really worried about this decision. I haven't got enough information at the moment. I'm going to decide at Christmas is a decision. And I think that's pretty important, that deferring decisions in this way is going to be clear out your mind. Delegating, sometimes as entrepreneurs, if we're the first person to start our own business, sometimes we think because when we first started, we made all the decisions, it's always going to be that way. Well, you'll never build your business if you can't effectively delegate to other people. Okay, so delegating is a really important skill. So rather than plow into making the decision yourself, you might think, okay, this is a pretty minor decision. I'm going to let my marketing company do that, or I'm going to let my receptionist make this decision, or I'm going to let my general manager or my salesperson. The more decisions you allow a person to make, the more that you're going to be able to empower them. They'll get more out of their job, and it'll free you up as well to make the really important ones that you should be making. Okay, and then lastly, you can make a decision yourself to decide and say. And if you do make a decision, say no, I'm not going to defer it. I'm not going to delegate it. It's my decision to make now. That means you need to decide. Well, that's when you need to set the affirmative question. Okay, the affirmative question is something that's really written, a question written in an affirmative way. For instance, if we've got some sales issues, okay, so the issue is sales, and that we've got an opportunity to hold a stand at a trade expo in order to drum up some customers. I always find that in the define stage, when you're thinking about the options to put in your affirmative question, it's good to have two options. The brain thinks in binary, this or this. And it's better to do a either or question than one that just requires a yes or no. So should we spend the $3,000 on the trade expo or not is not nearly as powerful as, in order to fix my sales slump, should I hold a trade expo, or should I invest the same amount of money in a social media campaign? Okay, you can see how that second question is so much more powerful, and your brain immediately lends itself to jump and use your gut feel to get to the next stage. Okay, so with a defined step cracked, you then can move on to the next step, which is assess, which we'll get to in a minute. But start to think about, what are you going to do differently now that you know about this, the importance of this defined step? Because it's really, I think it's really one of the hardest things to get your mind around, yes, maybe, but it's such an important part of the decision-making process. So I really recommend, if you can, spend a little bit of time on those defined videos. You'll understand how important, but also a few tips on how you can start to implement a few things in the decision-making process to make it a little bit better. Okay, so that's essentially module 2 completed. Next up, we're going to move into module 2. Okay, so module 2 is all about assess, which is the second step in the assess process. And there's 3 sites that we're really trying to understand when we're looking at the assess side of things. Okay, the first site that we want to look at is your foresight. And the foresight's all about the future. Okay, so why is the future important in decisions you're making now? Well, sometimes in business, we'll make a decision and it'll have a very negative impact on the future of our business. I've seen so many people, they'll do a startup and they'll give their employees 20% of the share options, and then that employee leaves, but the agreement was so poorly done that they're now sitting with only 80% of the shares in the company, and the other 20% are employees that don't even work for them anymore. Or they bring on a business partner, for instance, who was a great friend of theirs, but it does 2 things. It ruins their friendship on one hand, and secondly, it can really hinder the business if the people aren't aligned. Okay, so foresight is such an important thing. So you need to start to think about, how do we think about the future when we're making decisions. This is probably one of the most powerful and innovative areas of the Train Your Entrepreneurial Life program, and we spend 6 out of the 12 modules on exactly this. There's 6 lenses of foresight that we actually start to train you on. 3 about you as an individual, where we help you with your philosophy, we help you with your proficiencies, and we help you with your passion. Okay, those 3 are really important, because if you're not making decisions for yourself, they're not going to be good decisions for the business. Okay, the three lenses of foresight that are all about your business are your business plan, your business prototype or your business model, and your business plan, okay, or progress rather, the stages that you go through in climbing the business mountain, okay. Each of these 6 lenses of foresight have a metaphor around them so you can actually start to remember them, because we cover a lot of IP in this program. How do you actually anchor some of this information so it's something you can use? Well, for instance, in the progress lens, we talk about that, being in business is a little bit like climbing a high altitude mountain. There's 8 stages that you go through, okay? And your goal is actually not to get to the top of the mountain, it's to get to the top of the mountain and down safely. Okay, so there's an example of how quickly you can use a metaphor, and then you'll be surprised in 10 years' time, it's something you'll still remember about the 6 lenses of foresight. Okay, so we go a little bit overboard with me wearing hats and that sort of stuff in the later modules to hopefully drive that home a little bit. The next of the lenses not the lenses of foresight, the next of the sights in the assess stage that you need to start to think about is insight. I developed fairly early on in my, well, probably not early on in my business career, but maybe about 4 or 5 years into my business career, I developed a concept I call the perpetual growth principles. I got challenged by my general manager at the time, who I was trying to get to take over from a succession point of view. And he said, Creel, Blueprint's such a unique business compared to all of the other businesses I've been in. Why don't you work from home and come up with the formula for how we do business here compared to what other companies do? And I thought that was a bit unusual. But I remember sitting at my desk on that first day of working at home and thinking, okay, what is it that's made Blueprint so successful and so fast growing and so, maybe run so differently to other organizations and corporations? And I came up with a concept that it was really about how we started to remove the frictions in business. And from frictions, I started to realize that back in my Year 9 science class, I remember my teacher saying that about Newton's laws of motion. And doing a little bit more study around Newton's laws of motion, I realized that there's an uncanny resemblance between the 3 laws of motion and what you need to start to really focus on to make good business decisions, or use insight to make faster, better informed decisions. And I call that the perpetual growth principles. Okay, so in module 11, we'll share with you the perpetual growth principles. And out of all of the IP that I developed, it was probably the IP that made the biggest difference about allowing Blueprint to be one of the fastest growing businesses in Australia year on year after. Now, I think we became the 6th fastest growing businesses, BRW's Fast 100, and then we were the 3rd fastest growing business. And then the following year, we were off the Richter scales. But unfortunately, to participate in that particular competition, you have to have under 250 employees. And when we had over 250 employees, but we're still growing as if we were a company with only 50 employees. So yeah, I'd really recommend. They're a little bit of a leap of faith, because not many people sit down and say, here's a business theory based on something that happens in the physical universe and how you can apply it to the business universe. But trust me, it is something really powerful if you can understand those 4 principles, which are as simple as reducing frictions, fostering what we call an actuator. It's the opposite of a friction. A friction is something that holds you back. An actuator is something that pushes you forward. And there's 8 different actuators that you can implement in your business. Things like alignment, things like leverage. And then the last 2 principles are, one is how do we maximize balance of your stakeholders? How do we create win-win relationships? And then finally, it's how do we minimize mass? I'll tell you a little story around that one of the things that happened in my business fairly early on is that I always thought that the bigger the business, the more successful it is. And I came up with a few issues around that. For instance, 18 months into business, we had a Sydney office, and we thought, we have to have a national presence. So we put a little office in Brisbane and one in Melbourne, so we could say that we had 3 offices around the country. And that was a really poor decision. We really lacked a lot of insight in that regard, because we'd increased mass. And as soon as you've got 3 offices, things become a little bit, not only a cost higher, things become a lot harder to manage. Okay, so probably within 12 months, we then closed our Brisbane office and closed our Melbourne office. And right up to the point when we sold our business, we really only ever had a Sydney presence. And there was huge amounts of business we could do just from that one location. So I think that really taught me the lesson that more is not always better. Okay, and it's like the same thing with employees. As an example, one of my friends did a trek to Pakistan a few years ago, and there was, I think, 4 of them in his group, and they went for 27 days, but they had to take something like 90 porters with them because they needed people to carry water and food and tents and sleeping bags and other supplies. But as soon as you have a certain critical mass of that, you need porters to carry the porters' tent, food, water, and then you need porters. And employees are a little bit the same. The more employees you get in your business, you'll need someone to manage them. And the more managers you get in your business, the more managers you'll need to manage the managers. So the less people you have, the less products you have, the less things you have in your business, the more successful you will probably be. Okay, so that's just one of the principles which I've unpacked for you a little bit. And then lastly, the last sight that you need to start to consider is hindsight. And hindsight's all about the past. If foresight's about the future, insight's the replacement of a business case, essentially. People think that business cases are the panacea that they spend months and months preparing, unfortunately, but anyone can prove in a business case that you should be making a decision one way or the other. But we use the perpetual growth principles to bring that insight into the present. But hindsight is all about how do we take the learnings from the past. A lot of entrepreneurs are very forward-focused. And because you're forward-focused, you forget to learn from past decisions you've already made. Okay, and these past decisions, the reason why they're important is I see so many entrepreneurs make the same bad decisions over and over and over again. For instance, they'll employ people that are right in front of them or their friends, and that didn't work, and they ruin the friendship. And then 6 months later, they'll employ another friend or someone else that's just right in front of them, rather than going to a wider market. Okay, so that's an example of how do we learn from our hindsight to make better decisions, which incidentally I'll be talking a little bit more in the next module, which is how you build a decision bank of hindsight. So if you've got any questions about that, feel free to stick your hand up, and I'm happy to answer that. Okay. There's a question here that someone's asked around, what if there's multiple stakeholders making a decision? Okay, well, I think that's fine. But one of the things, when you have got multiple stakeholders in your business, ultimately you don't really want to make decisions by committee. That's for corporations. In your business, you need to start to think, okay, who's the person that's delegated the responsibility? It might be you, or it might be one of your staff. Doesn't mean that you can't be involved in the decision, but ultimately you need to rest the decision making with one person. That's going to be more likely to be successful. Okay, if you can actually say, no, you are responsible, doesn't mean that you alone are the one involved in that decision making. Okay, you can still collaborate with the other people. They can still put their ideas forward, their options forward, and those sort of things as well. Okay, so thanks Jamison for asking that question. So the hands up here. Alex, if you can just unmute.
Yeah, sure. So I've just got a question here from Robin. It's in relation to the percentages of the questions that you ask or the decisions that you make. So she just mentioned this is all very well if your back isn't against the wall, but if the consequences of a decision are going to make or break a business, even a 75% chance may be too low. So can you just elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, thanks. That's an excellent question, actually. And, too many times as entrepreneurs, we have our backs against the wall, don't we? I have a little thing that somewhere in the TYE program I talk about called brick theory. Okay, so brick theory is a little theory that I put together that every person has got what we call 100 mind units. So those 100 mind units are completely free if we've got nothing taking up the mind units. But of course, there's things in business taking up the mind units. I don't have enough money. There's things like, oh, I need to get back to that angry client, or I need to hire a new general manager, or I need to clean the office. All of those things start to take up mind units. And there's mind units that are taken up also from being at home. My wife said, you need to bring some milk home, takes up some mind units. Or I'm really worried about my dad because he's got cancer. Okay, all of these things take up mind units. But what I've seen is as those mind units start to creep up, we've got too many things on our mind, we get to a stage where we don't have capacity to make decisions. And that's what we call hitting the wall. Some of you might have hit the wall in the past. I know I did. I remember working 112 hours in 1 week. If you do the maths, it's not many sleeping hours in a 7-day period. But after that time of working 112 hours, pretty close to being in a row, I got to work, and the following week I'd hit the wall so badly, even if someone asked me a cup of, Creel, would you like a cup of coffee? I'd look at them with this blank stare, and then about 30 seconds later I'd say, yes, please. Answer that simple question straight away. Okay, so that's when you get all your mind units being used up. What my recommendation for people that have got their backs against the wall is starting to make those low-hanging fruit decisions. Okay, if things like that aren't going to make or break your business. So the more that you can actually bring your mind units down, because as soon as you make a decision, it comes out of your mind. Even if you defer it or delegate it, it's out of your mind. So the more decisions you can make like that aren't make or break decisions, then you can bring your powers of decision making to those decision making issues that will make or break your business. Okay, so hopefully that shed a little bit of light on that question. Thank you for asking that. Looks like Alex has got another one here. Alex?
Yep. So we've just got a question by Ben. He's just asked if you could please cover off the lens components further on page 29.
Okay. Good question, Ben. Okay, so we will be doing this a little bit more in module 5, but let me do it now while you've asked that question. So I mentioned before there's 3 lenses that are all about the individual, which are the passion lens, the philosophy lens, and the proficiency lens. The passion lens essentially is how do we help you understand what motivates you and what your end game is. Okay. The philosophy lens is how do we actually work out what your beliefs are? Because my belief that the beliefs of a business really need to be stemmed right down from the entrepreneurs. So we get really clear on your values, and we'll be doing that in, I think, module 6. The proficiency lens is all about your own skills, because again, too many people embark on a business journey which is reliant on their skills that aren't a match for what the business needs. So it's my belief that we should be changing the business model to make sure it plays to your strengths, so you don't have to overcome your weaknesses. Too many people think, oh, I'm so hopeless at marketing, I need to do a course or whatever. Well, if you are hopeless at something, maybe you could improve, but maybe not. Maybe you need to play to your strengths or employ someone that has got that strength. Okay, so that's the 3 lenses of passion, philosophy, and proficiency. That's about you as an entrepreneur. And then the 3 lenses are about business is the progress lens, the prototype lens, and the plan lens. The progress lens are these 8 stages of the business journey I talked about. And what we'll be doing is in module, I think, 8, getting you very clear on your vision, because if you're clear on your vision and what stage you're currently in, it's easier to get to the next stage. So for instance, if I said to you, not sure where you guys are based, but if you had to walk from Sydney to Melbourne, it's quite a big stretch in your mind. It seems so daunting. But if I only said, you need to walk from Sydney to one of the outlying suburbs like Campbelltown, it's 35 kilometres. Your mind can probably say, yeah, I could probably get there. Once you get to Campbelltown, you go, okay, now you need to walk to Wollongong, which is another 45 kilometres. Your mind can start to break things down into bite-sized chunks. And that's what we do with the business journey in the business stage. The prototype lens is really all about the business model. And we spend a fair bit of time there to try and get you to experiment with your business model. But one of the things that I've learned that you'll discover too in module 9 is the importance of having a magic metric. Too many people really overcomplicate business models, and if your business model is overcomplicated, you're not going to be able to have the right sort of measurements in place unless you have a magic metric. And essentially, a magic metric is the one thing to actually keep score. And then lastly, On the plan lens, it's all about having priorities. A lot of people have a business plan that really, is hundreds of pages and used as a doorstop in the office, but after they write it, they never look at it again. Well, it's my belief that you need to have a 2-page business plan, but most particularly is you need to have a group of priorities that keep you in check to ensure you're meeting that plan. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of feedback, but I covered those very quickly. But in the next mentoring session, we'll cover these 6 modules in a lot more detail. Let's now move on with time getting by. Let's now move on to first of all the entrepreneurial I model, which is a define, assess, and decide process. And then hindsight is about building a decision bank. The perpetual growth principles are all about building insight. And then finally, there's the 6 lenses of foresight there you can see right around the I model that I've got on the screen at the moment. So in module 4, we're covering decide. Okay. The reason why decide is pretty important is a little thing I call the entrepreneur's curse. In fact, I was just nominated to be an influencer in LinkedIn previously. I didn't actually realise it was such a big deal, but this little tortoise I got for the first article I wrote. And the reason why I wrote that article about the entrepreneur's curse is I see it as such a fundamental thing. If people don't recognise that they've got the entrepreneur's curse, everything else that happens in business is going to be for vain, because you really need to understand how an entrepreneur thinks, and then you need to be able to counter some of that thinking. So essentially, the entrepreneur's curse is this: that you come up with these, brand new, exciting ideas that make everything else, including last month's brand new, incredibly exciting idea, feel a little bit like maybe a month's worth of sorting through your sock drawer. Okay, that's the entrepreneur's curse. You're always looking for greener pastures. You're always trying to innovate and do the next thing, but you don't finish the things that you're already working on. Okay, so how does the decide step fix that? Well, the decide step is all about the outcome. Okay, it helps us ensure that the decisions are not only made, but the decisions get actioned. Okay, so how do we do that? There's a 5-step decide process, which again, you'll be doing some of these things, but so many people, I guess, make a decision, and particularly those Bill Gates that change their mind all the time. They make a decision and they'll change their mind. Well, this is how to get around that. First of all, you need to clarify the decision you've made, and that's pretty much just putting it into I have decided to employ a general manager for $100,000 by the end of July using our recruitment agency. Okay, so there's an example of clarifying the decision rather than just saying, oh yeah, I'll hire a general manager. Next, you want to make some commitments. I will call a recruitment agency or 3 recruitment agencies to negotiate a deal to find my general manager. It might be an example of a commitment you make for that decision. It's also important to remind yourself the reason why you've made that decision. I've hired a general manager so I can be freed up to be able to focus on being more strategic and not do the jobs that I hate doing, right? If you write that decision down, the reason down, you're more likely to get that decision action because it's talking to your own motivations, okay? Next, we'll put some objectives into place to make sure that the decision is going to be effective. For instance, a good decision might be if a general manager comes on board within 12 months, we would have doubled the size of the business. Might be one of the objectives that you put into place when you're deciding. And then you want to put the immediate next step, something you do as soon as you get you write your decision down. You actually pick up the phone. You call your friend who knows which recruitment agencies to use. Right, might be an example of a next step that you could put into place. Okay. One of the things that we like to do with the decide process, and this is what the Decisionship app does, is you write the decision down. You put all of those 5 things, but particularly you put what does success look like. So I mentioned before that a success for hiring a general manager might look like we would have doubled the size of the business. Well, doubled is a bit too vague. How do we put something, get an extra $500,000 might be a better way of putting it. And then the next thing we ask is, when will you know by? I'll know by at the end of next June, at the start of the next financial year. So you put that date in. What the app does is actually sends you an email at the end of next June. It says, back in July, you made a decision to hire a general manager for $100,000. You said that success would be if your company turned over an extra $500,000. Was it a good decision? Okay, so this starts to build hindsight. And building hindsight obviously flows into the rest of the decision-making process. You might be making decisions too fast, too slow, with too much angst, or not enough information. Okay, so they're really the main things that I wanted to cover today. We've got a chance now to actually ask a few questions if there's any questions that someone wants to ask. Okay, there's one just come up on the screen there at the moment. The question is, should you get a board of advice? Okay, that's well, it depends on the circumstances, depends on the size of your business, really. For me, we probably about 3 years into business, we started using a formal board of advice. But even up to that point in time, we had I guess, an informal board where it was people that were our brain's trust, that we would trust. We didn't pay them. We would go and ask them questions. Once you do get a board of advice, I think it is important that you pay them. You'll find that you can make them a lot more accountable. They'll rise to the occasion, and it'll be money well spent. It certainly was for us. So one of the things that we did do in our business with boards of advice is we always like to turn our boards of advice over every 2 years. What we found is after 2 years, you really knew what the person was going to say, which is pretty cool. You get to know them so well that all of a sudden, for the rest of your life after that first 2 years, you don't have to pay them, but you can still, they're like these little board members sitting on your shoulder. You can still ask those same people those same questions, and 90% of the time you get the right answer that they would have asked anyway. So I really recommend having a board of advice and revolving them every couple of years like we did. Well, actually, one of the things that worked really well, and one of the things to help me realize how important decision making is, probably the first 5 years of having a board of advice, sometimes the board meetings were successful, sometimes they weren't. But we got to a stage where the board meetings got to the first half an hour was about looking about the past, and we'd say, let's cover financials, let's cover this. But the rest of the 1.5 hours of that board meeting, we always answered 3 questions. That was on the agenda. These are the 3 questions that we're going to answer. And every board meeting was different, but framing the board agenda around questions that needed to, or affirmative questions that needed to be answered, was really powerful. And I think was part of the reason why this decisionship methodology has been so successful. And there's another question here from Eric. What is the ideal decision-making profile and why? Okay, that's a good question with a long answer and a wrong answer. The answer is there's not really the right decision-making profile. If you think about all of those decision-making profiles that I talk about, whether you're a procrastinator or a worrywart or a data junkie or a happy-go-lucky, all of these are very negative personalities if you think about it. They've all got negative components. So the reason why I've made them negative is how do you start to, if you are some of those combinations of those personality types, how do you start to improve it? So we're not actually saying that you have to be any one of those types or any mix of those types. So ideally, you should be somewhere in the middle. You don't want to be a bull-to-gate or a procrastinator. You don't want to be a data junkie or a head in the sand. And you don't want to be a worrywart or a happy-go-lucky. Okay, so somewhere in the middle generally is what we're looking for. So, but that was a good question. Okay, so I think we're pretty nearing time now. I appreciate the questions that you did ask. To make next session a lot more interactive, it might even be worthwhile if you could send through some of your questions before the webinar, because then I can really specifically talk to your own big business questions. Okay, so thanks for your time today, and I look forward to hearing how you're going with the next 4 modules in a month's time. Talk to you then.